Hey guys, tonight we begin in a place where the walls sweat, the air smells like rusted metal and damp wool, and there's a kind of echo that only happens in stone chambers below the earth. You blink in the dark, shackles clinking softly against your ankles, and realize that your bed is a pile of straw, suspiciously damp in places you'd rather not think about. Your mouth is dry, but the water bucket is just out of reach. It's not a dream. It's the beginning of punishment in the Middle Ages, and you, unlucky soul, are right in the center of it. This isn't the part of history with knights and banquets and flowing banners. No, this is the side that smells of burned hair, boiled fat, and old blood, where justice is loud, slow, and terrifying. And unlike today's courts with their polite objections and lawyer banter, medieval justice had a flair for the theatrical. Because back then, pain wasn't just a consequence, it was a statement that, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start by shuffling through a long corridor lit only by torchlight. The air is thick with soot and something sour, maybe sweat, maybe vinegar. You can hear a muffled scream echoing from somewhere, and the guard who guides you doesn't flinch. His boots squish in something wet. You try not to look down. See, medieval punishment wasn't just about dealing with crime. It was about putting on a show. A good punishment had to be visible, memorable. If it could be heard 3 streets away and talked about in taverns for a week, even better. Justice had to feel bigger than you. And in this world, fear was more effective than fairness. Let's start with something simple, though. You're not quite at the torture why bits yet. Right now, your punishment is more symbolic. Maybe you've stolen a loaf of bread or said something clever about the wrong noble's haircut. In either case, you found yourself in one of the most common and humiliating devices of the time. The stocks. Your march to the town square, where the stocks sit like a piece of furniture no one wants but no one dares throw out. It's a wooden frame with 2 holes for your feet or sometimes your arms and head, depending on the model. You're locked in, and suddenly your world becomes very, very still. You can't scratch your nose, can't sweat the fly buzzing around your mouth, and certainly can't stop what's coming. Because here's the fun part. Stocks weren't used alone. They came with audience participation. Everyone from toddlers to the elderly could join in. People brought their leftover vegetables, their insults, and, in less polite villages, their chamber pots. That's right, you could be pelted with turnips, rotten fish, or worse. The punishment wasn't the confinement. It was the crowd. There's a record from a small English village where a man was locked in the stocks for impudence, and the local midwife threw an entire dead chicken at him, stuck, for an hour. Historians still argue whether the public enjoyed these scenes purely for justice's sake or for the sheer entertainment value. But either way, it worked. You didn't want to end up in the stocks. Kids made up rhymes about people who had. Gossip circled faster than fleas on a pig. And if you were unlucky enough to be funny-looking or a known gossip, your punishment came with extra seasoning. And speaking of seasoning, yes, some people had spices or mustard thrown at them. Usually as a joke, sometimes as a weird community prank. There's at least one recorded case of someone being peppered to tears in a French village. You have to imagine that sneezing while your neck is locked in place is not ideal. The church sometimes intervened, saying that such cruelty wasn't exactly Christ-like, but the local magistrates often ignored them. After all, a good public punishment kept people from stealing, lying, or mocking the mayor's son. It was social glue held together by public embarrassment and cabbage. There were variations, too. The pillory, for instance, was like the stocks but worse. We'll get there next. But for now, imagine standing in the square, your hands and feet locked, a gentle drizzle starting to fall. The wind is cold. A dog has wandered up to sniff your shoes. Children laugh from behind a barrel. Someone spits. You close your eyes and pray they don't bring out the tomatoes. Not because they hurt, but because they stain. And here's where the fringe tidbits come in. Did you know some towns actually had designated rot bins for punishment days? People would collect their worst leftovers and let them ferment in advance, just in case someone was going to get shamed that week. It became a mini tradition in some places. Imagine scheduling your vegetable spoilage around the town gossip sentencing. Of course. There's also the case of Henry de Wick, a 14th century troublemaker who broke the stocks by wriggling too much. He sued the village for splinters. No one knows if he won, but the record exists, and it's absurd enough to be real. It's the medieval version of blaming the seatbelt for your speeding ticket. Eventually, your sentence ends. Your legs are numb, your back hurts, and you smell like pickled onions and old ale. The townsfolk wander off, already forgetting your face. A boy tries to follow you home singing stinky thief," until his mother smacks him on the head. You trudge back to your cottage or your prison cell, hoping no one recognizes you next week. But don't relax just yet. The stocks were the warm-up act. The medieval world had plenty more creative punishments waiting in the wings. Some were designed to hurt your pride. Others were designed to change you, literally. And as you lie down tonight, still sore and maybe a bit moldy from all that produce, you realize something strange. You got off easy. You wake up sore, itchy, and deeply regretting the town's fondness for fermented cabbage. But today's punishment isn't about getting pelted with old vegetables. Today, they want to make a statement. The stocks were yesterday's embarrassment. Today, it's the pillory. And oh, how much worse that is. From the outside, the pillory doesn't look much different. It's another wooden contraption with holes for your head and hands. But don't be fooled. The stocks kept you seated out of the way. The pillory makes you stand center stage, fully exposed to the wind, the crowd, and whatever imaginative projectiles they can find. You're marched back to the square, still bruised, maybe still smelling faintly of beetroot and shame. But today you see something new. The pillory stands at eye level on a raised platform, like some kind of sad little stage. And guess who's the main act? That would be you. The crowd gathers fast. Children are eating strips of dried eel like it's popcorn. A woman with a bonnet has brought her knitting. Someone's selling meat pies. And there's an audible buzz in the air. The kind of excited hum that means your humiliation is about to become the town's afternoon entertainment. A guard pushes your head and hands into the pillory. The wooden frame slams shut with a finality that's hard to describe. The edges are rough, and they dig into your neck just enough to remind you that flinching is not an option. The first missile is a clump of damp moss. Not bad. You brace. The second is a handful of something squishy, maybe old berries. Then comes the real show. Rotten eggs, clumps of dirt, maybe even a fish head. There's no rule book here. It's chaos. And unlike the stocks, the pillory invites spitting range. You feel the first one hit your cheek with a humiliating splat. You close your eyes. Too late. A local boy tries to poke your ear with a long stick. Someone throws a dead squirrel. You wish that were a joke. Historians still argue whether pillory time was actually an effective deterrent or just a sort of public hobby. What's clear is that it was about more than punishment. It was a community event. You were put on display not only to suffer, but to remind everyone else that's stepping out of line. Gossiping, cheating at dice, saying something rude about a noble's haircut was a fast track to standing here, in the center of it all. Interestingly, some people volunteered for the pillory rather than pay a fine. Why? Because once it was over, it was over. You took your lumps, literally, walked away with a few bruises and a damaged ego, and got on with life. Better than being tossed in a damp dungeon for a month and catching whatever fungus was growing on the prison walls. But the pillory also had a dark twist. In some towns, the punishment was customized. If you'd lied, they tied a sign to your neck saying, "False tongue." If you'd stolen bread, they might hang a moldy loaf from your shoulders. And in one bizarre case from Germany, a woman convicted of scandalous laughter was forced to wear a carved wooden donkey head during her pillory time. Apparently, she'd chuckled a little too boldly at a town council meeting. The Horror Point 1 fringe case tells of a barber surgeon in France who made such sarcastic comments about the bishop's bald spot that he got 5 days in the pillory wearing a wig of leeches. Was it effective? Unknown. Was it absolutely disgusting? Definitely. The crowd didn't always follow the rules either. Sometimes things turned ugly. There are accounts of pillory victims being stoned unconscious or even killed. Guards were supposed to prevent that, but in practice, if the mob got rowdy, you were on your own. The line between punishment and execution blurred easily when tempers flared or ale flowed too freely. And here's a detail you'll love. The pillory was occasionally placed near butcher stalls or fishmongers, on purpose. The theory being that any old scraps lying around could double as ammo. Economical and symbolic. A kind of recycling, really. Even rain didn't stop the fun. There's an account from 1392 of a man left in the pillory during a thunderstorm. They found him soaked, shivering, and coated in what can only be described as cabbage paste. He lived, but never stole again. Scholars still debate whether the psychological trauma of the pillory outweighed the physical discomfort. Some say yes, it created lifelong social scars. Others argue that the brief shame served as a clean break, letting people reintegrate without further penalty. What's not up for debate is this: the pillory worked as a form of social memory. People remembered faces, they remembered the smell, and they remembered how it felt to see someone else brought low. And if you thought being a man in the pillory was bad, women had it worse. The crowd was crueler, the comments sharper. There's one recorded instance of a woman accused of scolding, a crime so vague it basically meant talking too much, being pilloried with her tongue nailed to the frame, just for an hour, long enough to learn her lesson. Hopefully. And the pillory wasn't just for locals. Visiting merchants could end up in it too, especially if they cheated customers, sold rotten goods, or insulted the town ale, which, let's be honest, probably deserved a few insults. Eventually, your time is up. The guard unlocks the frame. You slump forward, dripping with, well, let's just call it community contributions. Your legs wobble. Someone claps sarcastically. You hobble away, hair matted, dignity evaporated. And yet, somehow, you're still luckier than most. You survived. But let's not get too comfortable. Because if you'd been caught by an angry mob instead of a judge, the next punishment would have skipped the wood and gone straight for the feathers. And tar. Your feet are still sore from the platform. Your arms ache from being bound for hours. And every time you move your neck, you're reminded of the rough wooden pillory edges that dug in like a dull saw. But today, there is no platform, no legal procession, no town crier to read your crime aloud. Today, there is only vengeance. Because now we enter the messy, smoky world of extrajudicial punishment. And if you've made enemies in town, say, overcharged for a barrel of salted fish, flirted with someone you shouldn't have, or whispered that the bishop's sermons were sleepier than a goose in winter, you might find yourself part of the sticky, itchy, burning world of tarring and feathering. This one's rarely listed in official punishments because, let's be honest, it was basically mob justice wrapped in goose fluff. But it happened a lot, especially in small towns, where law was more suggestion than system, and everyone kind of nodded along when Old Man Rolfe decided that someone needed a good feathering. You start your day as usual. Maybe you're at the market haggling over a bucket of limp turnips. And then, without much warning, hands grab you. Dozens of them, shouting. Someone throws a rope over your shoulders. You twist. You kick. But there's too many. You're dragged to the edge of the village, maybe behind the blacksmith's, where a large metal pot is already heating. Inside, sticky, black tar, usually pine pitch or something equally clingy. Someone stirs it with a stick that looks disturbingly like it's been used before. The smell hits first. It's sharp and chemical, like burned pine resin and scorched oil. And the heat, oh the heat, you don't have to be dipped in it to feel it on your skin. But lucky you, you're not just watching this pot boil, you're becoming the entree. Now, let's clarify something. They didn't always dunk you in head first like some nightmarish stew. Usually, they poured it, with ladles, slowly. Sometimes the clothes were stripped off first, sometimes not. Depends how generous your mob is. And no, medieval tar wasn't usually hot enough to cook you alive. This wasn't molten lead. But it burned, stuck. And worse than the pain was the itching later. Oh, and the part where it never really washed off properly. Imagine explaining that smell at the next village feast. Then come the feathers. Soft, you think. Gentle. But no, these aren't pillow fluff. These are goose feathers, chicken feathers, whatever could be plucked or scooped up from the barn floor. They stick to you in clumps, mat in the tar, gather around your mouth, tickle your eyelids. You're transformed, slowly and humiliatingly, into some kind of tragic barnyard creature. You're marched around the village like a carnival attraction. People jeer, children point. One enterprising kid offers to ride you for a coin. Someone calls you Sir Chicken Pants, and somehow that name sticks. Now, historians still argue whether tarring and feathering was actually as common as folklore claims. Some say it was more legend than practice. Others insist that rural records, which often weren't well kept, missed the bulk of it. But a few vivid descriptions survive, and they don't read like bedtime stories. One 14th century tale from a French village tells of a baker who watered down his dough and charged full price. He was caught, tarred, feathered, and tied to the bakery sign for 2 days while pigeons landed on him. That's a special kind of irony. In another fringe case, a group of traveling actors were accused of stealing from their host's pantry. Not only were they tarred and feathered, but someone painted their cart like a chicken coop. They spent a week trying to scrape off the paint, and reportedly, their next performance included an unplanned chicken dance. And yet, it wasn't always fatal. That's the twisted part. Tarring and feathering wasn't meant to kill. It was meant to transform you. Temporarily. You weren't a criminal forever, but for a few unforgettable days you were marked. Publicly, laughably, painfully. You were, in every sense, a walking warning sign. Even the tar itself carried symbolism. Sticky, permanent, clung to everything, much like your reputation after such a punishment. And the feathers? They weren't just for laughs. They dehumanized, turned you into a thing. A squawking, twitching, absurd figure to be pointed at, not pitted. Some scholars believe the practice functioned like an early version of social media shaming. A physical meme burned into the town's memory. You became the reference point for bad behavior. Don't lie like Willem, unless you want a feather suit. And it wasn't just peasants doing the punishing. Sometimes the mob included clergy, merchants, even nobility. The system of justice blurred here, because while the law might say fine him, the people might say feather him. And in a place where communal opinion meant survival, guess which one won? Afterward, you'd stagger home, sticky and feathered, hoping no one recognized you. But they always did. The tar marked your clothes. The feathers clung for days. The smell lingered for weeks. And oh, the itching. Let's not forget that. The tar trapped everything. Bugs, dirt, whatever debris the feathers brought with them. Medieval soap? Not up to the task. You'd scratch in your sleep. You'd sneeze feathers. You'd curse chickens in your dreams. But at least you're still breathing. because as bizarre and humiliating as tarring and feathering was, it wasn't the worst fate on the punishment menu. Not even close. Some punishments weren't about public shame. They were about public awe. And nothing demanded reverence quite like the hiss and roar of fire consuming flesh. Yes, we're going there, so rest tonight, wrapped in sticky shame and gently molting feathers. But know that tomorrow, the town square will smell of smoke, wax, and heresy. You don't sleep well that night. Not just because of the residual tar clinging to your hairline or the feathers still inexplicably stuck to your heel, but because there's a strange tension in the village air, a hush and anticipation. People whisper instead of shout. Even the chickens seem subdued. You wake early, before the bell tolls, drawn outside by the scent. Smoke, ash, something sweeter beneath it, like burnt cloves or tallow? You're not the only one. Villagers gather near the square like moths to a flame, which is ironic, because what they've come to see is exactly that. A flame and what or who is meant to be consumed by it. Today, we visit execution by burning, one of the most terrifying punishments in the medieval imagination. Not always the most common, but certainly one of the most theatrical. It wasn't just about removing someone from society. It was about showing everyone else what happened if you so much as thought the wrong thing. And nothing got you into a fire faster than heresy.it begins, as these things often do, with a procession. The condemned is led through the crowd, often wearing a simple shift or robe, white, to symbolize purity, which is a cruel touch when you think about it. Their hair might be shaved or left wild and tangled, depending on the mood of the authorities. Sometimes a placard is hung around the neck, heretic, blasphemer, which the crowd doesn't shout. Not yet. There's an eerie silence, broken only by the steady drumbeat of boots on cobblestones. You find a good spot near the edge of the square, where someone's selling meat pies and warm ale. Because yes, executions are somehow still public gatherings. People bring snacks. Children sit on shoulders. One man even has a folding stool. The stake is already waiting. It stands tall, uncomfortably close to a church, deliberately so. The symbolism isn't subtle. Around the base, bundles of dry brush and kindling are stacked neatly, like it's all part of a firewood display at the village market. It would be almost cozy if it weren't for the chains. The condemned is tied to the stake. Not too tightly, after all, you want them to move, to twist, to beg. A performance needs action, doesn't it? Now, here's the part that historians still debate. Was the burning always carried out to completion? Some accounts suggest that in certain cases, the victim was strangled or garroted first, then their body burned posthumously. Others insist that in more theatrical executions, especially high-profile heresy trials, the fire was very much real and very much alive. One quirky fringe detail. In some trials, condemned heretics were gagged to prevent them from speaking as they burned. Why? Because there was a risk, an actual perceived risk, that their final words might sway the crowd, inspire sympathy, or worse, sound suspiciously like miracles. A calm, smiling martyr was far more dangerous than a screaming one. But here's where the dark ritual takes full shape. The cleric steps forward. He reads a long, droning prayer in Latin. Most villagers don't understand it, but the tone is clear enough. This soul is condemned. The sentence is divine, and you are safe as long as you stay quiet, obedient, and, ideally, completely invisible. Then the torch. The first tongue of flame kisses the brush. Slow at first. You hear the crackle before you see the glow. Then it spreads sideways, upward, hungrily. The smoke thickens, and as the flames creep toward the center, they begin to lick at the hem of the robe, then the feet, then you look away. Some don't. Some stare. Some close their eyes but peek through their fingers. Children are told not to look, but they always do, because this spectacle is meant to teach a lesson. And that lesson isn't don't break the law. No, the real lesson is don't question the church. Don't preach strange ideas. Don't study the wrong book. Don't talk to the woman with herbs in her pockets and too many cats. Don't do anything that smells even faintly of otherness. Because the fire is always hungry, and it remembers names. Now, if you think only witches and heretics ended up at the stake, think again. There are documented cases of coin forgers, political traitors, even disobedient monks getting a taste of the flame. In one bizarre incident from the 1300s, a man was accused of sorcery for correctly predicting a rainstorm. That's it. He said, "Feels like rain." And when it rained the next day, boom, sorcerer. Burned. Historians still argue whether this specific execution even happened or if it was later propaganda to make certain villages seem more pious than others. Either way, it says something about the mood of the time. Knowledge could be dangerous, especially if it wasn't sanctioned. One infamous method involved placing gunpowder pouches under the arms of the condemned, part mercy, part spectacle. The idea was that the explosion would speed up death, reducing suffering. But let's be honest, if you're chaining someone to a wooden pole and setting them on fire in front of an audience, reducing suffering isn't really the priority. There's even an odd little legend, fringe, not widely believed, about a monk who supposedly survived the flames 3 times. He was eventually declared a miracle and pardoned. But years later, a bishop insisted the monk had actually just been very sweaty and fire-resistant. That bishop was, allegedly, struck by lightning 2 weeks later. You shuffle back home after the flames are down to embers, the crowd dispersing slowly. Some people are chatting like it's market day. Others seem quieter, disturbed. A girl holds a daisy and asks her mother if the smoke hurts angels. The mother doesn't answer. You pass the empty stake on your way out, still smoldering. A curl of smoke rises lazily into the pale sky. You keep your eyes down. Tomorrow you think you'll just stay home. Keep your head low. Maybe pretend you've gone deaf. Just until this whole fire-happy mood passes. But no such luck. Because the punishment that's coming next, it doesn't burn. It breaks. And it takes its sweet, cracking time. You don't want to go out. Not after what you saw yesterday. But the market won't wait. And your pantry is down to a lump of hard cheese and a beetroot that looks suspiciously like it's plotting revenge. So you walk, quietly, eyes lowered. But you're not the only one on the move. A group of villagers is heading toward the edge of town, where a wide flat patch of grass, normally used for archery practice or seasonal dances, has been cleared and trampled. There's something being assembled in the middle. Long wooden beams, iron hoops, a large will. Oh no, you've heard of this one. Everyone has. Some whisper it as a bedtime threat for naughty children. Others say it never really happened, that it's just a scary story cooked up by monks with too much time and too few hobbies. But the device is real, horribly real. And today you get a front row seat to the most unsettlingly slow punishment of all. The breaking wheel. Also known as the Catherine wheel, the tormentum rotarium, or if you're feeling especially medieval, that big circle of agony no one walks away from. This is not about speed or spectacle. This is methodical, calculated, painful in a way that's designed to make your soul feel bruised. They bring the condemned forward. He's young, too young, really. His shirt is already ripped, eyes swollen from a night in the stocks. The official reason for his sentence? Highway robbery and murder. But there are rumors that the robbery was a loaf of bread, that the murder was a nobleman's dog that lunged at him first, that this whole thing has less to do with justice and more to do with a certain baron making an example. The executioner approaches. He's calm, almost gentle, wears a leather apron and a thick scarf to keep the dust out of his beard. He checks the wheel, about 6 feet in diameter, wooden spokes reinforced with iron bands. not for support, for stability. It needs to hold, because what's about to happen will strain the limits of both wood and bone. The condemned is laid out beside the wheel. Sometimes, in some variations, the victim was tied to the wheel directly. Other times, like this one, they're stretched out next to it, limbs aligned with the empty gaps between spokes. Then comes the iron bar. The executioner raises it slowly. The crowd holds its breath. Thud. First strike, the leg just below the knee. The goal isn't to kill, it's to break, to shatter the bone without piercing the skin. That's important. This isn't messy, yet it's controlled, deliberate. Thud. Next, the thigh, then the arm, the other leg, the forearm. Each blow calculated to fall between the joints, avoiding the torso, keeping the victim alive, awake, aware. Historians note this was often choreographed. Yes, choreographed, to ensure maximum suffering without immediate death. In some cases, the condemned would be given a kind of opiate or alcohol beforehand, not for mercy, but so they'd stay conscious longer. Thud. The crowd isn't cheering. Not really. Some people wince. One man looks faint, but they stay. Because again, this isn't just punishment. This is performance, and the show must go on. Once the breaking is done, the real display begins. The twisted, broken figure is hoisted onto the wheel, limbs threaded through the spokes, tied in a grotesque lattice of flesh and splintered bone. The wheel is mounted upright or occasionally angled at 45 degrees, just enough to catch the sunlight. Like a macabre windmill of suffering. He's not dead. Not yet. And here's the worst part. He might not be for days. I end some recorded cases. Victims survived on the wheel for up to 3 days. No food, no water, just wind, sun, crows, and the occasional pious villager muttering prayers from a safe distance. Sometimes a mercy stroke, a final blow to the chest or throat was granted. Other times, the executioner simply walked away. You glance around the crowd. People shift uncomfortably. The mood has changed. There's no thrill here, no satisfaction, just silence and the rhythmic creak of the wheel as it turns slightly in the breeze. A few fringe accounts describe strange acts of compassion. A baker's daughter who snuck water to a wheel-bound prisoner. A priest who refused to look. A black cat that curled up beneath the wheel and purred as the victim died. Historians argue whether these are real or just attempts to insert humanity into an inhuman ritual. But even the possibility is enough to make you blink hard and look away. This punishment wasn't reserved for the common criminal. Nobles, too, could be sentenced to the wheel, though they were usually granted quicker ends. One German count, convicted of treason, was broken and wheeled but died instantly when the bar struck his heart. Some say that was intentional. Others claim the executioner was just really bad at aim. But for everyone else, the wheel did what it was meant to. It reduced a person to nothing. Not just physically, but symbolically. You weren't just broken. You were unrecognizable. You became a warning, spinning slowly in the wind, casting long shadows at sunset. You walk home that evening in silence. The wheel creaks behind you, the sound following you like a whisper. It will still be there tomorrow, and the next day, maybe even the day after that. And it makes you wonder, what would you have to do to end up there? Steal a chicken? Speak out against attacks? Say something clever to the wrong person? You suddenly feel very small, very breakable. But don't worry, the wheel isn't coming for you. Not tonight. Tonight, the village rests, and somewhere in the distance, bells chime. But next time, we're diving underground, into something darker, deeper, and infinitely more psychological. Because you haven't truly experienced medieval punishment until you've been locked in the dark, with no idea how long you'll be left there. You thought the wheel was bad. You thought nothing could be worse than bones shattering like firewood, or the smell of burning robes clinging to your cloak for days. But today, there's no fire, no bar, no crowd, just a door it's set into the side of the hill, stone-framed, iron-banded, half-covered in moss. You've passed it before, probably dozens of times, thinking it was just another root cellar. But today, 2 guards stand in front of it, one with a ring of keys, the other holding a lantern. You're told this is a sentence of solitary confinement, the kind used in monasteries, castles, and, increasingly, urban prisons for those who needed time to reflect. But the truth is, no one ever came out of this kind of punishment the same, if they came out at all. This is the oubliette, from the French oublier, meaning to forget, which is exactly what happened to anyone dropped inside. You step forward and peer down into the gloom. The ladder's long gone, or maybe never existed. Just a smooth drop, 15 or 20 feet, ending in cold stone. The shaft is narrow, wide enough to fall through, but not much more. The air is damp and still. You can hear water dripping somewhere far below. This is where we begin. Prison in the Middle Ages wasn't what it is now. People weren't sentenced to decades behind bars. Punishment was typically swift: flogging, branding, hanging. But sometimes authorities wanted something slower, something quieter, something that could make a person disappear without the mess of execution. That's where oubliettes came in. They weren't always part of the official punishment record. Sometimes a prisoner was simply held for further questioning, and then forgotten. Literally. No food, no water, just time. Lots and lots of time. There are still debates among historians. Was this widely used or only in the darkest corners of the continent? Some claim oubliettes were exaggerated by later storytellers, especially during the Gothic revival. But archaeological digs have uncovered more than a few sealed stone pits containing rusted manacles, rotting rope, and occasionally, bones. You're guided down into a larger dungeon room first. This one has a fire, at least, and a guard dozing in a corner with half a mug of ale. Chains dangle from the ceiling. Rats scurry across straw. The smell is a mix of mildew, rot, and human resignation. And then, in the far corner, you see it. A round opening in the floor, barely wider than your shoulders. Just a hole. A mouth in the earth yawning open. A rope dangles into it, though it's frayed and damp. "Go on," someone says. It's not a threat, just a suggestion. You crouch and lower yourself into the darkness. And that's when it hits. The silence. Not complete, there are still drips and echoes, but thick, close. You can hear your own heartbeat in your ears. Your breath feels loud, and everything is black. Not night black, not eyes adjusting black. This is the kind of dark that presses on your eyeballs. There's barely room to sit. The walls are stone, slick with moisture. You touch them and instantly regret it. Something furry skitters across your hand. You scream, but the sound just bounces back at you. This is the punishment. Nothing. No stimulation. No light. No food, maybe. Or worse, some food, just enough to keep you barely alive for days or weeks. Prisoners were known to go mad here, talking to themselves, singing nonsense songs, scraping patterns into the walls with fingernails. Some kept track of time by scratching tallies with a bit of bone. Others lost all sense of time within hours. And the worst part, you don't know how long you'll be here. A day, a week, forever. Because in many cases, the oubliette wasn't about waiting. It was about disappearing. You were no longer someone the authorities needed to punish. You were someone they needed gone. Cleanly, quietly. There are records, though sparse, of prisoners being rediscovered decades later. One story tells of a noble's political rival who was thrown into an oubliette and presumed dead. 30 years later, during a renovation of the castle. The workers broke open a sealed chamber and found a skeleton, curled in a corner, next to a crude drawing of a family crest. Was it real, or a later embellishment to spice up a dull chronicle? Historians still argue a quirky fringe detail. Some oubliettes were decorated, carved with little crosses or painted with grim scenes from the Bible, hellfire, demons, the Last Judgment. Not for the benefit of the prisoner, but for the guards who needed reminders that this wasn't just cruelty. It was justice at least. That's what they told themselves. You try to stretch, but the ceiling scrapes your shoulders. You wonder if it's night, or morning, or if the guards remember you're here. One story tells of a man who survived an oubliette for 12 days by catching drops of water on his tongue and eating the moss on the wall. Another claims a prisoner dug their way out with a spoon. Spoiler, extremely unlikely. Those stones are not spoon-friendly. Eventually, you start to hear things. Not voices exactly, but suggestions of voices, like someone whispering just out of reach. It's probably the echo, or maybe it's your brain, desperately filling the silence with something. You hum to yourself, a song from childhood. The rhythm soothes you for a while, but then you forget the words halfway through. You start again, over and over, the same half song, again and again, until you forget you're singing at all. And this, more than the flame or the breaking or the crowd, is what makes the oubliette terrifying. You vanish from the world.no audience. No martyrdom, no monument, just a slow erasure, scribbled out by time and moss. You curl in on yourself, knees to chest, and whisper your name, just to hear it, just to make sure it still belongs to you. Eventually, the hatch above opens. Light spills in like fire, and you flinch. A rope drops. You're pulled out slowly, blinking, hunched, changed. The world is still there, but you don't recognize it. Someone hands you a crust of bread. It crumbles in your fingers. And as you stagger back toward the village, people watch you with curiosity. They whisper, because now you're the warning. Next time, though, you'll get to stay upright. You'll even get a chance to move around a bit. Because medieval punishment, ever creative, has just introduced a special chair designed not for sitting, but for slowly tearing your dignity apart piece by agonizing piece. You wouldn't think a chair could be threatening. It's just a chair, right? For legs, a back, maybe a cushion if you're lucky. Something you sink into after a long day of surviving plague and tax collectors. But this chair, the one they're wheeling into the square right now, isn't for relaxing. It's not even for sitting. Really, it's for confessing. Welcome to the interrogation chair, sometimes called the torture chair, but more accurately described by one medieval chronicler as a throne made to make devils weep, crafted from heavy oak or iron, with armrests, restraints, and a terrifying array of sharp metal spikes covering every surface. This is not where you want to spend your afternoon. You approach slowly, blending into the edge of the crowd. People pretend not to be watching, but everyone's looking. Everyone always looks, especially when someone's about to be strapped into the chair of shame. Now, here's the thing. There were many versions of this chair across different regions. France had its own, the Germans another. Even the Spanish developed a deluxe model with added restraints and a footboard studded with nails. But the common features: spikes, everywhere, hundreds of them, long enough to press into the flesh, short enough not to pierce organs. The goal wasn't death. Not right away. It was compliance. The prisoner today is a merchant's wife, accused of hiding stolen church relics. Probably nonsense. Her husband likely fell afoul of a jealous rival or refused to bribe the right cleric. But in the eyes of the local inquisitors, that's all the pretext they need. She's brought forward, bound, her hair tangled, face pale. A priest recites something in Latin, more for performance than salvation. Then, slowly, carefully, She's lowered into the chair. Every motion is deliberate. Every touch of fabric against a spike is a new decision. Do you lean into the pain or try to hover and exhaust yourself holding still? And here's the twisted brilliance of the chair. It's a trap for your own body. The more you squirm, the worse it gets. Move an inch, spikes in the back. Shift your arm, blood from your elbow. It punishes stillness and motion alike. Iron manacles clamp her wrists and ankles to the armrests and legs. A leather strap holds her chest in place. She's breathing fast. You can see her lips moving. Prayers? Please? Maybe just muttered memories of her children. And then the interrogation begins. No whips. No flames. Just questions. Where did you hide the relics? Who else is involved? What did you whisper in confession last Lent? Each unanswered question is followed by a moment of silence. Not a strike, not a scream, just the weight of the chair itself doing the talking. Spikes press deeper. They don't need to be hammered, they just wait. Wait for her to sag from exhaustion. Wait for her to faint and slump. Wait for the slow, inevitable descent into her own flesh. Some versions of the chair were heated. Yes, heated. A brazier slid underneath, warming the metal until it seared as well as stabbed. The heat didn't kill, but it loosened tongues, or burned the truth into silence. Historians still debate which version is worse, spikes cold and cruel or red hot and whispering. Fringe accounts suggest even more elaborate variants. One was said to have an internal mechanism. Turn a crank and the spikes extended, tightening their embrace. Another, supposedly used in a Bavarian court, had sharpened metal stirrups for the feet, forcing posture while pain radiated up the spine. That one might be apocryphal, but still, someone had to imagine it first. And here's a truly chilling detail. No confession extracted under torture could be used in court unless it was repeated freely afterward. So once the prisoner confessed, under the chair, the rack, or worse, they had to be brought back later and asked to confirm it, of their own will. Imagine that. Dragged half dead from the chair, your blood still drying in little crescents behind your knees, and asked, politely, "Would you like to repeat your confession?" And you say yes. Because what's the alternative? Another session. She doesn't scream right away. They never do. The pain is too strange, too all-consuming. First, it's just a tremble in her jaw, then a sob, then a hoarse whimper as the weight of her body, her own weight, is turned against her. And that's when the questions come again. Did she confess? Maybe, maybe not. Sometimes the truth didn't matter. If the Inquisitor wanted guilt, guilt would be found. The chair didn't care what was true. It only cared what hurt. You step back from the crowd, heart racing. A joke bubbles up in your mind. Absurdly, if this is the welcome chair, I'd hate to see the guest bed. You don't laugh, because here's the haunting part. This wasn't seen as evil. It was called justice. Pain purified. Suffering revealed secrets. The body was a conduit to the truth. And the chair? The chair was simply the medium. Even now, centuries later, replicas of these chairs survive in museums. Tourists take selfies with them. Some even sit in them gingerly, nervously, like it's a theme park ride. They don't sit long, and if they really knew, what had soaked into those planks, what screams echoed off that wood grain, they'd back away slowly and never return. You watch as the woman is untied. She crumples. A cart waits to carry her away, but she doesn't move. Maybe she confessed. Maybe she didn't. It doesn't matter that she's never returning to her old life. The chair took more than blood. It took her. And as the square clears and the chair is wheeled away under a rough canvas tarp, you realize something strange. The chair's done its job, but it hasn't moved. You did all the moving. The fear, the pity, the deep-boned discomfort. It's all in you now, and it's going to linger. Next time, we're going from iron to water. You'll want to hold your breath, literally. Because in medieval justice, being proven innocent was no easy feat, especially when your survival was taken as proof of guilt. Your feet are wet. That's the first thing you notice as you step toward the riverbank. Not soaked, just damp enough to give your toes that soft squelch that ruins a good pair of boots. There's mud on your soles, reeds brushing your ankles, and somewhere ahead, the low bubbling churn of water moving slowly past the village. This isn't a punishment square. There are no executioners or flaming torches here. Just a group of curious onlookers standing in a loose half-circle near the shallows. Some of them are muttering prayers. Others are just here for the show. There's always a show. Today's punishment is trial by ordeal, specifically the ordeal of water. And the terrifying part? The goal isn't to die. It's to prove whether or not you're guilty. Through water, through floating, or not. And yes, this is real. You glance to the side and spot the accused. A woman in a plain, damp shift, arms bound at the wrists, eyes sunken with sleeplessness. She's young, maybe 20. She's accused of witchcraft. Of course she is. The village swears she caused a crop to fail. A cow gave birth to a two-headed calf. Someone fell ill. The usual. So now she's being tested. You probably know the basic concept, right? They toss the accused into water, hands tied, and wait. If she floats, she's guilty because water, being pure, rejects the sinful body. If she sinks, she's innocent. And hopefully someone pulls her out in time. The logic is so circular it's practically a spiral staircase. But for centuries, this was legally acceptable proof. The water is cold. It always is. They pick early mornings or shaded ponds, claiming the clarity of the water matters. Priests bless it beforehand, turning a natural element into a divine judge. You might be wondering, why not cheat the system? Why not fake sinking? Well, first off, you're tied up. Ankles sometimes too. You're not just doing a lazy backstroke in your pajamas. And second, these aren't Olympic-sized pools. This is rough, weedy, silt-choked medieval water, the kind that gets in your ears and never comes out. There are logs, slippery rocks, leeches sometimes. And floating isn't as easy as it sounds, especially when fear locks your lungs and you forget how to breathe. They're tying her now. Not harshly, almost gently, like they're strapping someone in for a strange religious ritual, which in a way they are. A priest murmurs a prayer. A few drops of holy water splash across her brow. She doesn't flinch, and then, slowly, she's lowered into the water. Some towns used ropes around the chest to make retrieval easier. Others simply pushed you in and hoped someone had a long stick. The goal wasn't technically death, but many people did die. Drowning is quiet, easy to miss until it's too late. She goes under. Not completely, her face bobs above the surface. Her hair fans out like pondweed. A gasp ripples through the crowd. Is she floating? It's hard to say. Her body's suspended, neither sinking like a stone nor skimming the top like a witchy water lily. This is where things get murky. No pun intended. Historians still argue whether this ordeal was ever fair. Was it always a death trap? Were weights used to bias the outcome? Or did some officials honestly believe in divine judgment through water? Records show a few people passed this test. They sank, were pulled up sputtering, declared innocent, and released. But just as many or more never came back up, or floated, and were burned later. Some communities tried to rationalize it. In parts of Germany, courts began recording exactly how long someone floated before being declared guilty. A few even argued about body fat affecting buoyancy. Yes, medieval lawyers tried to bring physics into it. But mostly it came down to spectacle and fear. You glance back toward the river. She's being hauled out now, choking, soaked, shivering. Apparently, she floated. Guilty. It doesn't matter that you saw the water barely hold her weight. The crowd saw enough, and the priest nods solemnly. She'll be taken to the town holding cell now, awaiting further punishment. Burning, probably, or the chair again, or worse, confession. And you, watching all this, begin to feel the cold water climbing up your own legs. Not real, just your imagination, but it clings. Now here's a quirky tidbit for your dream bank. Some trials by ordeal were even weirder. There's a record of one man in 12th century England who had to carry a red-hot iron bar for 9 feet, and then wait 3 days. If his wounds were healing, God had clearly spared him. If not, off with his head. Ordeal by fire, or ordeal by boiling water, where you'd stick your hand in a cauldron to retrieve a stone. Lovely. There was even one called the korsned, a cursed bite. You'd be given a piece of dry bread and cheese and asked to swallow it while reciting a prayer. If you choked or gagged, guilty. If it went down fine, God cleared you. Think of it as the world's worst communion snack. Trial by ordeal wasn't just punishment. It was proof. The Church, for centuries, officially supported it, until Pope Innocent III started to have doubts in the early 1200s. Eventually, in the 13th century, ordeal-based trials were phased out in favor of, well, juries. Progress, that's debatable. But while the Church stepped away, local secular courts kept some practices alive for a while longer, especially in rural areas where belief in divine justice outweighed any papal decree. You walk slowly back from the river. People disperse. The girl is gone. Somewhere dry now, probably chained again. A fire will be lit tomorrow, maybe. Maybe they'll delay it. Give her a chance to name others. Someone always names others. The path is muddy beneath your feet. You try not to look at your reflection in the water, but you catch it anyway, just for a second. And it's not comforting. Because what you saw wasn't just your face. It was you, bound and drifting, barely afloat in the murky judgment of a medieval world convinced that pain equals truth and survival is suspicious. But don't worry, tomorrow you'll be fine. They've promised you a better fate. It even comes with music. Because next, you'll dance. Just not by choice. You don't feel the noose just yet. Not around your neck, anyway. But it's there, just behind your thoughts, coiled like a patient snake. Because today's punishment is about shame. Not blood, not burning flesh, just humiliation so profound, it rearranges your soul. You've heard of it before, probably. Dancing mania, they called it. Or the dancing plague. It sounds almost whimsical, like something out of a fairy tale. People dancing in the streets, wild and joyful. But this wasn't joy. This was fear, frenzy, and punishment all rolled into one. And it wasn't always voluntary. Welcome to the terrifying spectacle of the forced penance dance. A punishment wrapped in madness, and a madness sometimes mistaken for punishment. Let's set the stage. The year is 1374, and you're in the German town of Aachen. It's midsummer. The bells ring for vespers, and in the middle of the square, a woman begins to dance. Not gracefully, not like she wants to. Her limbs jerk, her eyes roll, her mouth hangs open like she's trying to scream, but no sound comes out. And then, another joins her, and another, and another. Within hours, a crowd of dozens is leaping and twitching and spinning in time to music that isn't playing. Shoes fly off, feet bleed, some collapse from exhaustion. Others rise again like puppets yanked by invisible strings. This is no festival, it's a panic. Historians still argue whether this was mass psychogenic illness, a form of ergot poisoning from moldy rye, or a collective trauma response to the endless horrors of plague, famine, and war. But what's lesser known is that some local leaders deliberately used it or forced it to shame and purge supposed sinners. In Strasbourg, for example, certain groups of sinful women, accused of adultery, heresy, or consorting with spirits, were forced to participate. Not because they had the dancing sickness, but because they deserved it. You see, the belief at the time was that dancing was both sacred and profane. Done in worship, it brought you closer to God. Done in excess, it summoned demons. So what better punishment than to force someone to dance themselves to the edge of sanity? You stand by as the crowd gathers in another small town square. A line of people, mostly women, a few frightened-looking men, are shoved forward. Their wrists are tied together with thin twine, their ankles loosely bound. A man with a drum begins to pound out a beat. It's irregular, syncopated, designed to jolt, not guide. And then a fiddler joins in, scraping wild notes out of a warped bow. The music isn't joyous, it's insistent. The dancers begin to move. At first, you think it's staged, like bad theater, but then you notice their faces, tight with pain, cheeks flushed, eyes vacant. Their limbs don't move like they should. Knees buckle. One woman drops, smacking her face on the flagstones, and two guards rush to haul her up again. She's shoved back into step. The whole square is holding its breath. You learn this is called a penance dance, an ecclesiastical invention. The local priest reads out each person's sins as they flail. Adulterer, blasphemer, midwife accused of poisoning births, woman caught praying backward to the devil. Backwards. Whatever that means. And as the dancing continues, something strange happens. The shame begins to blur with exhaustion. The movements go from desperate to surreal. You've seen leaves blow in a storm with more coordination. But the rhythm doesn't stop. Nor do the guards. They're not allowed to fall. Not yet. One quirky tidbit. In some towns, these dancers were forced to wear lead shoes. Heavy, rusted, strapped on tight. The theory was that the weight would both prevent escape and increase suffering, double punishment. Imagine tap dancing with dumbbells tied to your ankles while everyone you've ever known watches and judges. A few even had bells sewn into their tunics, so their every movement rang out across the town like a cruel joke. Still think dancing sounds fun. What's worse is what happens after. The dancers, once released, often couldn't walk properly for weeks. Muscles tore. Feet became infected. One French chronicler wrote that a dancer punished in this way lost the will to speak or eat and died 10 days later, his bones undone. His bones undone. Historians today interpret that as possibly referring to severe joint dislocation or untreated internal damage. But the language says it all. What was done here broke more than bodies. It broke identities. And here's the dark echo. This wasn't just some one-time fever dream. Incidents like this continued for centuries. In Italy, there was tarantism, a supposed spider bite that forced victims to dance wildly to particular songs, lest the venom consume them. Some scholars believe this, too, was used to shame those already on the social margins. Widows, sex workers, heretics. In Sicily, tarantella rituals emerged, half dance, half exorcism, where victims had to sweat out their sins. Forced movement as forced confession. And you, watching this strange, terrible ballet, begin to feel the panic these dancers must have felt. Not just the pain in their limbs, but the invisible barbed wire that wrapped around their names, their reputations, their standing in the town. This wasn't just punishment. It was erasure. Because after this, no one looks at you the same. You're the one who danced, the one who flailed, the one who fell. You are the memory of your shame, embodied. The drumbeat finally stops. The fiddler lowers his bow. The last few dancers stagger, drop, wheeze like dying animals, and then silence. The priest says nothing more. The guards escort the dancers away, barely conscious. No cheers. No cries of justice, just nothing. A slow, creeping quiet that makes you want to shout. But you don't. You just walk home, feet dragging, heart pounding, Because deep down, you realize something awful. You're starting to understand the rhythm. And that's the scariest part. Don't worry. The next punishment doesn't involve dancing. Just a ladder, and maybe a little stretching. Hope you're flexible. The ladder is taller than you expected. Not that you were expecting anything good, but still, there's something absurd about how it leans against the square's gallows post like a prop in a school play. Except no one's laughing, and the only performance is the one you're about to witness or endure. This is no ordinary ladder. It's part of the rack. Not a fireplace rack. Not a dish-drying rack. No, this is the rack that lives deep in every medieval dungeon's echo chamber. The one whispered about with dread and shuddering reverence. A wood and rope monstrosity designed with terrifying simplicity. Stretch the body until it speaks. Because that's what this punishment is all about, confession. You see, in a world before forensic science, blood tests, or DNA, the rack filled a particular niche in the justice system. It produced answers. Whether those answers were true or not, well, that wasn't really the point, now was it? The Inquisitors didn't need truth. They needed closure. And a screaming body, slowly pulled apart, tended to provide exactly that. You move closer. The rack itself is little more than a raised platform, usually oak or iron-plated wood, with 2 rollers at each end. Your wrists are bound to the top roller, your ankles to the bottom one. As the torturer turns a crank, the rollers rotate in opposite directions. Your limbs are pulled taut. First, you feel a stretch, then a snap, then another, and another. That cracking sound? Ligaments, tendons, joints unhinging like broken marionettes point one crank at a time. Today, it's a man accused of conspiring against the local lord. Treason, they say, or maybe heresy. It all blurs together eventually. What matters is that he hasn't confessed. Yet that he's already been questioned, slapped, denied food, thrown in a wet cell. Still, he denies the charge. So they bring him to the rack. And he knows what's coming. The crowd is smaller this time. Racking isn't usually public. It's performed in torture chambers, stone-walled, candle-lit, damp. But every so often, for high-profile cases or for effect, they bring it outside. Just to let the townsfolk know what might happen if they, too, grow too bold. A church official stands nearby, quoting scripture in Latin. Something about the body being a vessel of sin. His voice is steady, almost bored. The torturer, on the other hand, is fully engaged. Dressed in a coarse tunic, arms thick from years of turning the crank. He checks the bindings like a sailor preparing a ship's rigging. He doesn't speak, just nods when it's time. The first turn is small, just enough to make the man grunt. The second turn, that's when the screaming starts. And here's your mainstream historical fact. Torture via rack was a legally sanctioned method in many parts of Europe, especially during the late medieval period and into the early modern Inquisition. England used it widely, so did Spain. It was often justified as a means of clarification, pulling the truth out of the soul quite literally. But there was a rule. You could only stretch someone if the charge was serious enough. Theft? No. Heresy? Absolutely. And the person had to be warned in advance. Sometimes they'd even let you see the rack before using it. They thought that alone might prompt a confession. Imagine that moment. Standing in front of a wooden platform, ropes already soaked with the sweat of dozens before you, and knowing your bones might not be in the same place when you leave, you glance back at the man now. His arms are unnaturally long, shoulders distorted, one leg twitching at an odd angle. He's talking. It's not clear if it's words or just noise, but the torturer leans in, listening. You're not sure what's worse, the fact that this is happening or the fact that it might be working. Some say the rack wasn't even the most painful torture. There were worse. The strappado, being hoisted by your arms and dropped, the iron boot, the pair of anguish. But the rack was iconic. a symbol of medieval cruelty, and one that left visible, permanent damage. Here's a quirky detail for your collection. In a few recorded cases, the rack stretched people up to 6 or 7 inches taller. Temporarily, of course. Their tendons eventually shrank back, or tore so badly they never walked properly again. Some chroniclers referred to victims as looking like broken dolls. Another man once claimed, after being racked, that he could no longer feel warmth or cold in his fingers. His nerves had been drawn thin like strings on a lute. Some strings never pluck again. And then there's the debate, the one scholars still whisper about over their dusty manuscripts. Did the rack work? Well, define work. Did it extract information? Often. Was that information reliable? Absolutely not. But no one cared. Once you confessed, even if it was to something absurd like turning into a raven at night, the system got what it needed. The punishment could proceed. The records could be sealed. Order restored. You watch now as the torturer stops. The man on the rack has confessed, mumbled something about plots and sorcery. The priest nods. It is written down, sealed with a wax stamp, that he will be executed tomorrow. You wonder if he'll even make it through the night. 2 guards unbind him. He slumps off the platform like a rag stuffed with wet straw. And you feel it again, that tug at the edges of your body, the invisible ropes slowly turning. The worst part, you're next. Not for the rack necessarily. That would be too merciful. They've got a special punishment in mind for you. 1 that starts with a chair and fire and iron. Sleep tight. It's cold when you sit down. Not because of the weather, though the air is damp, the sky ashen, and the fog hangs just high enough to blur the rooftops. No, it's cold because the iron chair you're being strapped into has been waiting for you. And iron remembers. The iron chair, also known in some places as the Judas chair or the interrogation seat, is exactly what it sounds like, a throne of torment. Not metaphorical torment. Literal, poking, searing, scorched flesh kind of torment that you're not sure where to put your hands. That's all right. They'll decide for you. The assistants, 2 silent men in rough wool, with hands like butcher's blocks, guide your wrists into the iron armrests. The cuffs clamp tight, too tight. Your ankles follow, then your torso. A strap is drawn across your chest, another across your thighs. You aren't going anywhere, and you really wouldn't want to, because now you feel it. The spikes. They're not knives, not blades, just short, stubby iron spikes protruding from the seat, the backrest, the armrests, the footrest. Everywhere your body touches the chair, there's iron pressing into flesh, not piercing yet, just leaning. Impatiently. A warm wind gusts through the square. It smells of coal. And that's the key ingredient. See, the iron chair wasn't just about pressure. That alone would be bad enough. But its most terrifying feature, its signature, was heat. Beneath the seat, a brazier of coals is prepared. Slow, steady, and very deliberate. Once lit, it turns the chair into a medieval oven. Your body, the unwilling roast. And yes, this was real. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The iron chair was used throughout Europe during the late Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, especially during inquisitorial interrogations and show trials. It was popular in France, Germany, Spain, and parts of Italy. Sometimes it was heated, sometimes not, depending on how badly they wanted your answer. The spikes served 2 purposes. First, pain. Second, immobility. The second you shifted to relieve one pressure point, the spikes punished you elsewhere. Squirming only made it worse. As the coals start to catch, you hear a soft tick, tick, tick of the expanding metal. The spikes are warming up. Your breath catches. And then comes the real horror. They begin the questioning. You're not accused of sorcery or treason. No, you're accused of knowing something. Maybe where a fugitive fled. Maybe who buried the stolen relic. Or maybe it's vaguer than that, just holding secrets, which is funny, because you don't know anything. But they don't believe you. They never do. "Speak," says the robed man beside the brazier, his voice syrupy and calm. "You will not hold out long. You try. Really, you do. You explain. You plead. You repeat the same answer 3, 4, 5 times. But the fire doesn't care. It licks the belly of the chair. The heat rises. At first, you think it's your imagination. But then the spikes begin to sting. The back of your thighs starts to sweat. The iron cuffs grow hotter. Your skin flushes. You can't shift, can't scream, not yet. And the worst part, you're still at the beginning. Here's a quirky detail. In some German courts, versions of the iron chair included a hollow pipe beneath the seat that funneled smoke up through small holes around the spikes. That meant you weren't just burning, you were being slow smoked, like meat. Point one particularly cruel variant in Eastern Europe had a grated seat, so as the flesh blistered and peeled, it dripped down into the embers below. The smell was unmistakable and unforgettable. People didn't just confess under the iron chair, they begged. Sometimes they admitted to crimes they didn't even know existed. That there's one recorded case from 1473 in which a woman confessed to feeding her cow on Sundays, which was somehow taken as evidence of Sabbath desecration. Another swore he'd seen the devil in a turnip patch. He hadn't, but after 15 minutes in the chair, truth had nothing left to do with it. This punishment wasn't designed to punish the guilty. It was designed to force an ending. And scholars still argue over how official it was. Some say the iron chair was more legend than fact, an exaggeration from torture-era woodcuts and travelers' tales. But most agree it existed in some form, likely used in specific regions by specific judges. And the results? They were always the same. Silence, then screams, then silence again. Eventually, your mind disconnects. The iron beneath you feels more like liquid. Your skin is no longer stinging. It's peeling. You smell your own hair smoldering. The cuffs are branding your wrists. And the spikes, those hateful little spikes, are slowly disappearing beneath swollen flesh. And then, enough! Someone says, the fire is smothered. The brazier pulled away. You can't move. You don't even hear your own moans anymore. You're removed from the chair and placed in a wheelbarrow like overcooked meat. Congratulations, you've survived. Not everyone does. Some bleed out internally. Some never wake up. Others change. There's a monk in Avignon who, after an hour on the chair, spoke only in numbers for the rest of his life. Just numbers. Over and over. And now you begin to wonder, if they'd gone just a little longer. Would you still be you? But don't get too comfortable. You've still got miles to go before you sleep. Because next up isn't fire, it's cold steel. Blades. And one particularly long walk through a crowd of people who'd love nothing more than to watch your legs fail beneath you. See you in the next step. It's a quiet day for a public flaying. There's something strange about the stillness. No jeering yet, no rotten fruit flying through the air, just that peculiar hum of expectation, like the way air hangs before a storm. You stand in the square, again, but this time you're not alone in your dread. Everyone knows what today's punishment is. They've heard the rumors. The victim isn't just going to be executed, that they're going to be peeled. You didn't mishear. Today is the day of the flayer's knife. They bring him out in chains, his shirt already torn open, skin pale in the places it's still untouched. The executioner walks behind him, not in black, but in rust-colored leather, stiff and worn, stained darker around the sleeves. A long knife hangs from his belt, curved like a smile, polished to a gleam. This punishment, flaying alive, was rare, but when it happened, It made sure no one forgot. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Flaying was historically practiced as an extreme penalty in some cultures. Assyrians, Persians, and even certain medieval European states used it as punishment for treason, sacrilege, or extreme betrayal. Most famously, the English were said to have flayed corrupt sheriffs or officials, and in a few cases, hung their skins on courthouse doors as a reminder, because medieval justice wasn't always subtle. But this isn't justice. This is demonstration. The man is bound to a post, arms raised above his head, legs spread for stability. 2 assistants hold him steady. He's shaking already, not from the cold, but from what he knows is coming. A town crier reads out his crimes: conspiracy, heresy, insult to the king, theft, blasphemy. Some of it probably true, most of it irrelevant. The crowd waits, and the flayer begins. He starts at the upper arm, just beneath the shoulder. The knife doesn't slash. That would be too quick. Instead, it slices, carefully, deliberately, a long horizontal line, just deep enough to slide beneath the skin. Then, using his fingers and the flat of the blade, he lifts and pulls. It's not loud the way you expect. It's wet, like tearing a bedsheet underwater. A red sheen spreads down the man's side. His head lolls, but he's awake. That's part of the punishment. You have to be conscious. You have to feel it, at least for the first few minutes. The skin, once loosened, is slowly peeled downward in strips, revealing muscle, sinew, blood vessels. The chest first, then the stomach. In skilled hands, the face can be removed whole like a mask. And this particular flayer? Oh, he's skilled. It said some executioners trained for years to perfect the art of flaying. A clean flay could take over an hour. Some took longer, if the goal was to keep the victim alive through as much of it as possible. You take a step back, because it's not just the horror, it's the smell. You don't expect it, but the moment exposed flesh hits open air, there's a coppery steam that rises. It mingles with the scent of sweat, panic, and old cloth. You gag, and so does someone beside you. There's a debate among historians, yes, a real one, about whether full flaying was even survivable long enough to matter. Could someone remain conscious through half their skin being removed? Some say yes. Others insist unconsciousness comes within minutes due to shock. Still, in a few records, names are listed with times: flayed over 3 hours, expired at first hour, began confession midway through chest. One man in 1278 is reported to have begged the flayer to remove his heart last, so he could feel each layer leaving him. The flayer obliged. Quirky, yes, and disturbing. But perhaps the strangest flaying case comes not from the execution itself, but what happens after. Sometimes the skin was preserved, stretched and salted like leather, hung from doors, tacked to courthouse walls, even bound around books of law. A few museums today still have fragments. Brown, brittle, fragile. One such piece, allegedly from a Frenchman executed for treason, was said to have a faint tattoo on the upper shoulder. A saint's name, half-flayed, still visible. You try not to picture what that looked like while it was still attached. The man in the square is slumping now. His head dips. One leg trembles. The flayer moves to his back, making a neat line between the shoulder blades. The crowd is quieter than usual. A few leave. A few more lean in. You want to look away but can't. Because this is punishment as performance. It wasn't always public flaying. But when it was, it carried a clear message. Betray us, and we will unmake you. Not just kill you. Unmake you. Take away the barrier between body and world. Turn your skin into a warning sign. And in many ways, it worked. There are records of villages going decades without a major crime after a single flaying. That's not peace. That's terror made tangible. Eventually, the flayer steps back. The man is still, It's not clear if he's dead or just unconscious. A physician comes forward not to help, but to confirm death. The remains are removed. The skin? That will be dealt with separately. Somewhere, a scribe is already writing up the account. Who he was, what he did, how long he lasted. The page will be bound in records and kept in the city vault. Or, if the flayer was particularly proud, maybe the skin will decorate the vault itself. You take one more glance at the post. Blood still drips from the base. Flies are already circling. And you wonder, what could be worse than being skinned alive? Don't answer that, because they've already thought of it. And next, you're going to meet a man who feeds on that very idea. Not metaphorically, literally. You thought it couldn't get worse. You really did. After the spikes of the iron chair, the screaming steam of boiled skin, and the flayer's long, deliberate slicing. You assumed the Middle Ages had surely maxed out its horror potential. But no, now you meet a man known only as the Eater. And he's not a metaphor. See, tonight's punishment isn't about knives or branding irons. It's about fear so deep it settles in your bones and stays there. Not the fear of pain, but the fear of being consumed, eaten, bitten, and possibly not even all at once. Because this is where punishment blurs into mythology. Or perhaps it's the other way around. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval Europe was home to numerous recorded cases of anthropophagy. That's the clean, academic word for cannibalism. During sieges, famines, and plagues, people turned on each other when all else failed. But outside desperation, there were stories, creatures and humans alike, used as punishments themselves. The threat of being fed to wild animals was real, but the far more terrifying tale? Being fed to a man. You're not sure where it starts. Maybe it's France. There, a man named Gilles Garnier, the werewolf of Dole, was burned in 1573 after reportedly killing and eating several children. They called him cursed, a beast in man's skin. But whispers say he'd once worked for the court, a punishment executioner exiled after going too far. Others say it was Germany, a gaunt, silent man used by warlords to punish deserters. He'd start with fingers, then ears, piece by piece over days. Victims weren't killed. Not at first. They were gnawed, strategically. Each bite was measured, medical enough to keep them alive. Still others speak of pit prisons, where the condemned weren't executed, just lowered into deep stone holes. No food, no light, just one other prisoner, long forgotten, pale, and starving. Those stories sound made up. Maybe. But in 1312, the records of a Hungarian tribunal detail the sentence of progressive partial consumption by human means, imposed on a prisoner of war. The document lists 4 sessions over 8 days. Whether it's truth, exaggeration, or fear-fed fiction, you can't say. But it worked, because nothing stopped people quite like the idea of being slowly devoured, not by animals, but by someone who relished it. Here's a quirky tidbit. One infamous punishment in the court of Vlad the Impaler, a name that's already soaked in terror, involved starving prisoners being locked in a room with a corpse and forced to eat it or be executed. Those who refused starved. Those who gave in were branded and released. But no one spoke to them again. They were tainted, marked by hunger, horror, and shame. You're still listening, right? Good. Because the worst of this legend, the true punishment, wasn't death. It was becoming the Eater. In some cities, executioners were chosen not from volunteers, but from among the condemned. You survive your punishment, and now you deliver it to others. In one Italian case, an accused murderer was spared hanging on the condition he would serve the bench for 7 years, meaning he would prepare and execute tortures, floggings, even cannibalistic rituals on command. He did, and after those 7 years, no one wanted to sit near him again. He lived another 10, alone in the hills. Historians still argue, as they always do, whether these cannibalistic punishments were real or cautionary. Some believe they were exaggerated folktales, parables told to scare children or dissuade soldiers. Others point to recurring motifs in different regions that suggest something more systematic, something official. And then there are the bones. More than one archaeologist has uncovered medieval skeletons bearing human bite marks, the kind that match no tool, no animal, and no ritual post-mortem process. Just teeth, on ribs, fingers, even cheekbones. One set, found near an old prison site in Austria, had teeth marks and blunt trauma. The working theory, a prisoner tortured was used to feed another. Is it provable? Maybe not. But it haunts. And you can see how the threat alone, the whisper of the eater will take you, could keep even the most hardened criminal in line. The idea that you might not just die, but vanish. Bit by bit. So here you are again, in the square. But this time, there's no audience. Only the pit. You're led to its edge. A round stone mouth, maybe 15 feet wide. No light spills out. Just a damp, earthy reek. You ask what waits at the bottom. No one answers, but one man, old, bent, eyes full of bad memory, whispers, "You won't die fast." And that's all he says. Because you've entered a realm where punishment stops being about justice. It's about changing you. Corrupting what you are. Taking something normal, eating, existing, needing, and turning it into a sentence. You're lowered down. Rope creaking, torch flickering above. Then darkness. And then something moves. Is it a rat or a hand? Are you imagining the breath that isn't yours? You close your eyes, and that's when it speaks. Not a growl, not a roar, just a whisper. "I've been hungry." And that, you realize, is the cruelest punishment of all. Not being skinned, not being broken, but being remembered forever as someone else's meat. You're back in the open air. Barely. After that last descent into the dark, you thought maybe you'd seen the worst. But the Middle Ages isn't finished with you yet. There's one more punishment it's been saving. Something so twisted in logic, so smug in its cruelty, that it doesn't need blood or blades to leave you trembling. It just needs silence. Tonight, you find yourself locked in the stocks, but not the regular kind. These aren't the wooden frames that clamp your hands and neck while villagers throw eggs. No, these are the modified iron silence masks, also known as shame masks, or if you want the German term, Schandmasken. And they are specifically designed not to hurt you. Not physically. Not at first. They're designed to humiliate you publicly, relentlessly, and creatively, because sometimes the most terrifying punishment isn't about tearing the body. It's about unmaking the soul. You're standing in the town square. But you're not standing proud. Your arms are bound at your sides. A long iron contraption is being lowered over your head. It rattles. It stinks of rust and breath and time. And then it clamps shut. The mask. It's heavy. And not just in weight. This isn't a uniform device, oh no. Shame masks were custom built, often to reflect the crime committed. A man who gossiped might wear a giant tongue. A liar might be given a muzzle. A nosy neighbor? A long iron nose. Thieves wore pig snouts. Adulterers got horns. And for the truly hated, a full iron head with no mouth hole, no way to speak or eat. Just slits to breathe. You could see. You could hear. But you were no longer you. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Schandmasken were common across parts of Europe from the 15th to 18th centuries, especially in Germany and Austria. They weren't meant to kill, but to reduce. You weren't a person in them. You were a walking warning label, a joke made flesh. But it wasn't funny, because these masks were paired with other punishments. Public stocks, solitary display, or even being paraded through the village while townsfolk jeered. And you couldn't cry, couldn't shout, couldn't even apologize properly, because the metal distorted your voice into nonsense. Imagine needing to scream and sounding like a kettle instead. You breathe through the narrow vent. Your skin sweats beneath the iron. The inside of the mask is rough, Some even had small spikes positioned near the nose or tongue, just close enough to discourage fidgeting. And here comes the quirky tidbit. Not all shame masks were shaped after animals or cartoonish exaggerations. Some were disturbingly artistic, crafted into smiling devils, cackling women, or abstract frowns. One especially grotesque example resembled a goat playing a flute, supposedly used for punishing a wandering minstrel with a sharp tongue. You try not to imagine the irony. Some masks had bells attached to the top, so wherever you went, people heard you. You couldn't even hide in stillness. And sometimes the punishment wasn't over in a day. Some were made to wear the mask for weeks. Others were chained inside their homes, visible through barred windows, mask locked in place, unable to speak to passing neighbors. You became a living sculpture of your own shame. And here's where it gets worse. Sometimes they made you build your own. That's right. If you were a smith or an artisan or even just someone with tools, you were ordered to design the very device that would humiliate you. And if you made it too comfortable, too light, you'd be punished again for disrespecting the sentence. So you'd make it worse. For yourself. Historians still argue whether some of these masks were ever used on nobles or if they were purely a tool for punishing the poor and outcast. Some records suggest they were reserved for women, scolds, nags, and disobedient wives. Others hint that corrupt officials were sometimes forced to wear elaborate masks in front of the courthouse as an act of penance, and no one wanted to be seen in one. And no one forgot those who had. You see, the worst part of the shame mask wasn't the pain. It was the memory. The mask was burned into people's minds. Once you wore it, you always wore it. You were that woman with the tongue mask, that man with the horned helm, that teenager who wore the chicken beak muzzle for stealing bread. Your face was gone. Your identity was overwritten. You had become your sin. That, right there, is the genius of this punishment. It didn't kill you, didn't even injure you permanently, but it erased you socially. Even after the mask came off, people would stare like it was still there. And some prisoners, they kept hearing the bell. Long after it had stopped, the punishment lingers in a different way. You walk down a path and someone whispers, not because you were dangerous, but because you were seen as shameful. The Middle Ages didn't always need an axe to destroy you. Sometimes, all it needed was a little creativity, so you stand there, masked and silent, and the bell jingles with each breath, and you realize, of all the torments you've witnessed, from wheels and flaying to fire and blood, it might be this one that stays with you longest, because now you understand something truly medieval. Sometimes, the cruelest sentence isn't pain, it's permanence. And now, the last. You're not exactly sure how you've made it this far. Still breathing, still upright, still listening. But here you are, and the Middle Ages has saved one final horror for you. Not the most famous, not the most bloody, just the most hopeless. Tonight, you meet the coffin that doesn't bury you. You walk to the Iron Maiden. Not the band, though yes, it would have been easier if this were about guitars and hair. But alas, we're going to the cold, echoing heart of a medieval chamber, where a tall iron cabinet waits with open arms, and many, many spikes that you're still in second person. You still feel the air thicken around your lungs. The maiden's door creaks open, revealing the inside, and you already know, you already sense what's about to happen. She doesn't swing shut with a bang. She hugs, very slowly. Now here's your mainstream historical fact. Despite how iconic it is, historians agree the Iron Maiden was likely not actually used in the Middle Ages. At least not in the way you think. The first fully documented Iron Maiden didn't appear until the 18th century. Earlier mentions may have been exaggerated or symbolic. So, technically, it may not be historically accurate. But the terrifying idea, that's real. What matters isn't whether someone actually used it, but that people believe they did. And that belief was enough to terrify thousands. Fear, as you've learned by now, didn't need to be justified. It just needed a story. You step closer. The interior is lined with spikes. Some are longer than others. Some are curved. Some are placed right at heart level. Others aim for the eyes or the stomach. But here's the genius design. Most of the spikes aren't long enough to kill you instantly. They pierce, but they avoid the vital spots, meaning you die slow, very slow. Imagine that for a moment, trapped in darkness, bleeding into the iron shell around you, unable to move because any twitch might drive another spike deeper. Breathing hurts. Not breathing hurts. You don't even scream. You just linger. And the worst part, people watched. In some versions, the Iron Maiden had slits so townsfolk or guards could see your face. Your suffering was part of the spectacle. The world moved on and you remained inside. Until silence. Now, here's your quirky tidbit. One of the most famous Iron Maidens, the Maiden of Nuremberg, was proudly displayed in 19th century Germany as an educational piece, oddly enough. School children were brought to see it, told tales of its ancient use, and left with wide eyes and silent nightmares. It's been destroyed and reconstructed multiple times. And despite the evidence that it's more theater than truth, people still shudder at the name. Because the psychology of punishment matters more than its statistics. You believe in the maiden, so it might as well be real. Some stories suggest the condemned were placed inside naked, so the metal would burn or freeze against their skin. Others say that herbs were scattered inside, not to soothe, but to keep the victim awake longer. The smell of mint or lavender while your blood trickles down feels wrong, cruelly elegant. Historians still argue, naturally, whether the Iron Maiden was ever used operationally or whether it was just a torture theater piece. A threat, a symbol, a lie wrapped in steel. Some point to older Egyptian and Persian devices that may have inspired it. Others call it 18th century propaganda, cooked up to slander the barbaric past. But again, it's not about truth, it's about what people believed could be true. Because fear has a long memory, and in a time when most people couldn't read, a towering metal coffin with spikes, that made sense. Punishment as a tool of silence, of example, of social control. And this one had poetry. The Iron Maiden, feminine, elegant, deadly, like a lover and executioner in one. No loud bones breaking, no messy beheadings, just a quiet, suffocating end, heard only by the steel. In a way, this was the perfect ending for the Middle Ages. Not because it was the worst, but because it pretended to be merciful. You weren't whipped or flayed or burned. You were enclosed, contained, given a final embrace. How kind. But you know better now, don't you? You know the Middle Ages didn't fear brutality. It feared remembrance. The maiden makes you unforgettable. Even if she never truly existed, you take one last look at her. That cold, silent grin. The closed eyelids forged into her surface. The gentle tilt of her head. She doesn't hate you. She just accepts you, so you step back. One last shudder. One last breath. And now we ease into silence. Take a deep breath now. It's over. You've wandered through the dungeons of the past, seen the worst that fear and imagination could forge into reality. And somehow, you've made it through. There's no more iron, no more fire, no more whispers in the dark. The footsteps behind you are gone. The walls are no longer damp with secrets. You're not in a square surrounded by faces. You're alone now. Just the soft breath of night around you. Let it fall away. The spikes, the masks, the cages. Let it all drift back into the fog of old history, where it belongs. Because you're safe. You're here. And the only sound now is the low hum of stillness. Remember, these punishments, these twisted inventions of control and fear, they're gone. We've outgrown them. Or at least we tell ourselves we have. And maybe that's the point of all this, to remember what we once accepted, what we once feared, and to promise ourselves that we'll never, ever go back. You can feel your body sink now, a little heavier, a little softer. Let it happen. No more iron doors. No more shame. Just the gentle warmth of now. Let your mind slow. Let the images fade into the quiet of your breath. Let sleep come, not because you escaped the darkness, but because you've made peace with it. You're safe now at your home, and the maiden, she's just a story again, back where she belongs.